Hey guys, so I recently put together a system made out of spare parts that essentially equate to what was one of the most popular PC setups of 2016. So what we have here is the i5 6600K paired with a GTX 1060, and we have 16 gigabytes of RAM. All of this running on a MSI Z170 ITX motherboard. Now this GPU and CPU combo was one of the most popular setups you could have back in 2016. And I want to see how this actually holds up in 2022. The i5 6600K is a 4-core CPU, but it is a K series, which means we can actually overclock it and we do get higher RAM speeds. So the CPU is going to be running at 4.3 gigahertz and the RAM is going to be running at 3200 megahertz. 4.3 gigahertz should be achievable for pretty much any 6600K out there, except for some of the worst bin ones, but it should be relatively achievable if you have a Z170 motherboard or a Z270. And while 3200 megahertz on RAM is pretty standard nowadays, at the time of release of this hardware, that really was not the case. So we're pretty much the best case scenario for a 4-core, 4-thread CPU that at this point has pretty much been almost completely phased out. Even the i3s nowadays come with 4 cores, 8 threads, which was what i7s used to be in this time period. So we'll have to see just how limiting only 4 cores can be in 2022. Now, of course, the GTX 1066 gigabyte was the most popular GPU on the Steam hardware survey until very recently, where it was finally overthrown by the 1650, which is actually a regression in performance. But this still remains one of the most popular GPU models on Steam right now. So let's see how it holds up in 2022. Now, the first game that we're going to be taking a look at running on here is the Callisto Protocol. Now, the game is currently running the built-in benchmark with the medium graphics preset at DirectX 12. Now, the level of performance that we got out of this was not impressive, but it was still playable, with 1% lows being slightly above the 30 FPS range and our averages pretty much finishing the test at 79 FPS. Pretty impressive result overall, though the 1% lows aren't remarkable. If we end up dropping things down to the lowest graphics settings though, we actually end up in a far better result, with a final 1% result of 53 and an average of 111. You can pretty much get a high refresh rate gaming experience out of this, and we'll take a look at some actual gameplay so you can see that. As you can see in the actual gameplay, it really just depends on what exactly it is that you're doing, but you can expect to get some pretty impressive results overall. The game felt really smooth to play, and honestly speaking, even with the lowest graphics settings, visually it still looks really nice. Of course, FSR is putting in some work into this, but overall the gaming experience that you get at the lowest graphics settings is good enough. And if you want to bump up the visuals, you can always go to medium. Just expect your 1% lows to be under 60. Considering this is a brand new title though, I'm pretty impressed with the fact that our i5 6600K is actually able to keep up, and the GTX 1060 is actually also able to give us really great results here. Moving on to probably one of the biggest launches of the year, here we have Call of Duty Warzone 2. Now the game is currently running with the recommended graphics settings, which seem to be very close to just running at the most performant settings. And overall, the result that we got on here was very decent, with 1% lows that are pretty much in the 40 range and our averages staying very close to around an 80 FPS average. With a final 1% score of 43 and an FPS average of 78, this was a pretty great result overall, and the game was actually very playable. You can of course just go with the most performant settings possible to try to bump up those 1% lows to stay above 60 if you want to, but just going based off of what the game itself recommended was already more than decent enough. And of course, we are using Nvidia's image scaling, which the game actually natively supports within the UI itself, so that you can actually essentially do Nvidia's equivalent of FSR. And this does actually help to improve the level of performance that you get out of this pretty decently. But also, you'll see that the i5 6600K is still keeping up. It's very close to 100% utilization, but it's not exactly hitting that yet. So it's still actually able to keep up with a pretty modern title, which is surprising to me. I was not expecting to to see this kind of result out of the 4-core, 4-thread CPU we have here. Now, The Witcher 3 recently got its next-gen update, which just came with visual improvements on the PC release. Now, here you're seeing the game running with the medium graphics preset, and we do have FSR set to auto. So FSR will dynamically adjust itself to essentially try to hit as high of an FPS as it really needs to here. And you see that overall the 1% lows that we're getting are actually really good, and our averages are well above 60. You really can't complain about a 1% low of 50 and an FPS average of 72. So overall, really great result here. Really, neither part is being completely stressed out. So the overall result that we get here is really impressive. Of course, another title that saw an update this year is, of course, Overwatch, which got updated into Overwatch 2. Now, the result that we get out of this is very impressive. Not really too surprising considering that this was a title that was around when this hardware actually released. Of course, the update to Overwatch 2 did come with some visual improvements, and it also did include FSR being added into the game. So you're seeing this currently running with the Ultra Graphics preset, and of course, FSR is turned on. And overall, the FPS that we're getting out of this is pretty much insane. With a 1% low of 92 and an FPS average of 114, you're pretty much going to have an absolutely perfect experience in this game. The GPU is seeing 100% utilization here, and the CPU has more than enough headroom here. So really a perfect scenario for this hardware. Again, a title that was around when this hardware was actually mainstream and relevant, so it's not too surprising, but it's nice to see that an update to this game didn't completely make it unplayable from hardware of its original time. It seems that a lot of these long-lasting titles have only become more demanding, so it's nice to see that this is at least able to continue to work perfectly fine in this hardware. Now, another title that actually ended up dropping and taking over the world for a while, we have Elden Ring. Now, the game is currently running with a high graphics preset. The game itself doesn't actually support anything like FSR or anything like that, so we're running at the full 1080p resolution. And overall, the result that we got out of this was actually not too bad. A final 1% low of 45 and an FPS average of 57 is really nothing to scoff at, especially considering the age of this hardware. I was overall very impressed with the result that we got out of this. And if you really want to bump up those 1% lows, you can always drop things down to medium, but you really don't need to. You can just keep things at high, and the result overall is still going to be very, very decent. Overall, another impressive and surprising win, and another title where I thought that the i5 was really going to be a limiting factor, and it just wasn't. Now, taking a look at another title that was brand new on PC this year, we have Insomniac's Spider-Man. Now, the game is running at the medium preset here, and we are using FSR at the quality preset. And really, I thought that this game was actually going to bring down the little i5 to its knees here. And it's certainly getting a workout, but at least based off of the performance that we're seeing here, it's really not as bad as I was expecting it to be. 1% lows pretty much being around the 40 range, and our averages being above 60 pretty much most of the time means that the level of performance that we're getting out of here is more than adequate to really enjoy the experience here. Now, depending on what's going on, there will be moments where the 1% lows will drop into the 30s, but for the most part, they hover far closer to around the 40 range. And really, after playing this for a while, the overall 1% lows that we actually ended up with were at 53, and our FPS average was at 73. So in general, it was actually a really good experience here. Now, God of War running at the original quality settings and FSR set to the quality preset pretty much meant that we were getting a really nice result here overall. The game really very rarely would go under 60 FPS, with a final FPS average of 67 and 1% lows of 56 pretty much meant that we were getting a really rock solid experience out of this. And again, considering the age of this hardware, it's really impressive to see that a brand new title like this actually performs really well on here. Of course, brand new title is a little deceiving because it did originally launch on consoles a few years back now, but since it only recently hit PC, it is a brand new title for this hardware. But overall, the result that we get out of this was really impressive, and I was actually glad to see that the i5 was still able to keep up really well on here. Not really seeing 100% utilization or anything like that. It's really just a GPU limited scenario here, which means that if the hardware was actually upgraded, we could potentially see even better performance than this without needing a CPU swap. Now, another title from 2020 that I've really enjoyed playing has been Warhammer 40k Darktide. And the game is currently running right now with the lowest in-game graphics settings and with FSR 2.0 set to balanced. And overall, the result that we got out of this game was very, very decent. It was very playable, though the 1% lows weren't as great as I was hoping it would be. Throughout the whole experience of playing through the game, after doing a couple of missions just to make sure that DirectX 12 shaders weren't just constantly loading in the background or anything like that, even though the game actually does pre-compile the shaders before you even really launch it, still the overall result that we got out of this was an FPS average of 67 and 1% lows of 32. So while not an incredible result, it was still well within a playable range. There was just moments of stutter that would happen here and there, but nothing that really detracted too much from the overall experience. So while it wasn't the most ideal gaming experience overall here, it was still doable, and realistically I would rather play like this than not play the game at all. So I'll consider this one more of a minor win just because of the fact that it isn't the most ideal gaming experience, because again, 1% lows of 32 aren't exactly impressive, but an overall average of 67 is pretty decent for a game that pretty much is absolutely brand new, so I really won't complain too much about these results. Now we can take a look at another very popular title, though not one that released this year. We're taking a look at Forza Horizon 5. And you see the game currently running right now with the medium in-game graphics preset, no FSR or anything running. So we are running this at the full 1080p resolution. And the overall result that we got out of the built-in benchmark was really impressive, with 1% lows at 60 and an FPS average of 76. Pretty much means we're going to have a rock-solid gaming experience out of this. Now this game itself is very well optimized and it runs really well on a wide variety of hardware. So it's nice to see that this 6-year-old setup is still able to handle a game like this perfectly fine. Now we'll take a look at another game that is far newer than this hardware but performs really well on it. We're taking a look at Valorant, one of the more popular games out on the market right now. The game itself performs really, really well on here, as it should, because it is a game that is designed to run on pretty much a wide variety of hardware. This is more than enough and well within spec, though if you look at the CPU, it's actually seeing a lot of utilization here. We are far more CPU bound than GPU bound, which is to be expected on a title like this, but overall the result that we're getting out of this is a very, very impressive gaming experience with 1% lows well above 100, finishing up at 118 and an FPS average of 249. We can pretty much have a 240 hertz display and pretty much be able to saturate it a lot of the time. So if this is the kind of title that you play, you don't even need to think about a hardware upgrade in terms of your PC specs. You can think really more about just buying yourself a better monitor. And considering you might have had this hardware now for 6 years, it's really nice to see newer popular titles that run really well on this hardware. Now Valorant is a couple years old, but this hardware is more than half a decade old at this point. It's just nice to see that it's able to keep up. And of course, we can see here how it does in Borderlands 3's built-in benchmark, another title that is not from 2022 and is a couple of years old now, but it's still a surprisingly very popular title. But you can see it running with the built-in benchmark right now with the medium graphics preset, and it is set to DirectX 12. And with a final 1% score of 52 and an FPS average of 73, this is a really impressive result. Again, we're not running this at the highest graphics preset, but even at medium, it does look really nice and it performs really, really well. Another popular title that is a few years old at this point is Red Dead Redemption 2. And here you see the graphics set to pretty much the middle preset. We are running the game also with FSR set to balanced. And the overall result here wasn't exactly impressive. With the final 1% low of 31 and an FPS average of 44, it's not exactly the greatest experience. But if we drop things down to the highest preset that says favor performance and we keep FSR set to balanced, now our 1% lows jump all the way up to 43 and our FPS average is at 61. Of course, our CPU is seeing very high utilization, but so is our GPU here. Overall though, a pretty playable experience. Now in general, this hardware was surprising to me. In a lot of the titles from 2022, it actually ended up performing really, really well, and the i5 with only its 4 cores, 4 threads was not as big of a limiting factor as I was really expecting it to be. I went in expecting a lot of these titles to just fully utilize the CPU and cause a lot of drops in the 1% lows. And that just kind of did not end up happening in the vast majority of titles. In fact, in none of the games that we saw today did we ever run into a scenario where the CPU was so blatantly the problem that it was ruining the experience. Certainly with more modern hardware, you could probably see improvements in 1% lows, but nothing really ran at a rate where I would say it was unplayable. So I think this is really just a testament to just how good of a GPU the GTX 1060 really was, and the fact that the i5 here was also a pretty decent buy. Now, would I suggest that you pick one up nowadays? Of course not. When an i3 pretty much gives you more threads than this, there's really no reason to be picking this up unless you're getting an insane deal where you're getting a motherboard and CPU combo for practically nothing. Of course, getting a 6700K to pair with this system instead of a 6600K would be a far better move. The price points that you'll find them on the used market just pretty much make no sense whatsoever unless you're already on a Z170 or a Z270 motherboard. But I hope you found this look at 2016's most popular hardware to be as interesting and surprising as I did. I will catch you guys next time.